This is Unlearned, a self-rising production. I'm Jaime.
And I'm CA.
And we are your hosts. This is a podcast all about deconstructing who we are
and exploring who we are becoming. We are doing it.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Okay, so we're back. And what are we talking about today, CA?
Being awesome. We are talking about
our mugs.
SelfTrust. And
I'm sorry. Hold on, restart. Okay, restart. Hi, we're here.
Hi. Cheers.
What are we talking about? Cheers. I was just joking about the mug thing, about how we have weird obsessions with mugs. All right, shout out.
Yes.
Find us later online in social media. I'll post about this when the episode drops about, do you have a weird thing about mugs? The hold, the texture,
the weight
and the shape. And this is even too round for me. This is too much for me, but I was
gonna say, this is
it.
kind of my favorite, is a tall, slender.
Right.
That's if I had to choose, that's my very favorite. There are other shapes that I like, but tall, slender is like, chef's
I didn't
kiss.
know that about you. And also I'm laughing because these people who are listening to this on the podcast are like, what is this? Slender? Yeah. Okay. You get it. Slender cups, wide cups. You get it. Okay. Anyways, so we are talking today about self-doubt and self-trust.
Yeah. Cause I think we were talking about that a little last time, is establishing a sense of self-trust. And in figuring out how to even begin that work, the very first thing that you're going to get hit with is all the doubts that exist inside of you. And so trying to weed your way through that thicket is a job.
Right. Okay. Because if you think about how self-advocacy ties into this, right? So we're talking about when we're trying to establish the beginning stages of self-growth and the beginning stages of really coming to be who you really are, right? In order to be who you really are, your authentic self, right? You do have to establish whose voice is yours and whose voice is other people's in your mind, right? So you think about we think of the big concepts, right? The big concepts of religious ideologies, or maybe, your view on politics, or, really big concepts that maybe differentiate you between other people. And when we're teenagers, we might be really outspoken and, whatever, but it's interesting what happens when we get that switch from teenagers to early adulthood. We realize, in order to be part of a system, we might have to align with a group mentality a little bit more than we thought. Right. So think about it. You go to a new workplace and your workplace is super, I don't know, let's say they pray, right? I actually worked at a place like this. I'm not even kidding. I worked at a place that constantly was streaming Christian music, whatever. Christian music is Christian music, but it was very religious. And it wasn't specifically you can only go to this office if you are religious, but they were streaming Christian music. And then I'm pretty sure they had us pray during office meetings. And at no point did they ask me what religion I was. They just literally just said, we're just going to pray at the work meetings. And this is what I'm saying is it's that there's a small example there. But what I mean by that is you're all of a sudden hey, I really want this job. I really want to learn these skills. And now where's the line between my own belief system and their belief system? And am I putting myself in jeopardy if I say, hey, I'd appreciate it if we don't pray at these work meetings? Right. Yeah. And what is the fallout of being an individual in that system?
Right. Exactly. Well, and I think that's why it's important to teach how to actually do self-advocacy and boundary work, because, and this is something we were just talking about, is in situations like that, there is a way to advocate for yourself in a way that hopefully doesn't put you in a position of, taking away your job security. And that comes down to basically just controlling what your own choices are. So rather than saying, hey, I would appreciate if we didn't pray during the work meetings, because your employer might be like, well, this is my business and we're going to do
Right.
it the way I want to do it. You kind of set yourself up for a potential scary situation.
Right.
Say, I will be opting out of the prayer part of the meeting,
Right. Right.
like, and so, but even getting yourself to that point is we've gone light years. We've skipped over the whole topic we're talking about on today's podcast.
Okay,
If
that's
you
what we'll
can
do
do
here.
that, if you can do that, then you don't even need to listen to this podcast
Yeah,
right now.
just stop listening. Nobody listening here. Okay. No, but no, you were right. Like that's a step of so many things had to be there in order for you to
Yeah.
get to that place.
Yeah. So that does let's circle back around
Circle
to
back.
where we were, which is, how do you start to recognize and establish your own voice inside of yourself that isn't, all just an amalgamation of every other voice that has been ingrained into your brain up to that point. And I think there's like several stages of human development where this happens, where we start to establish like layers of identity. And that's just normal, right? That's a normal part of human development. I'm not sitting here saying like, if any part of your inner voice has ever been influenced by someone else, then there's something wrong with you. Like, no, that's not how it works. Like, we are communal beings and we are going to be influenced by people around us. So I'm not saying that nothing in your brain can ever be influenced by an outside source, but there is a difference between sort of just like putting on like an overcoat of an entire ideology that isn't your own versus like shopping at the store and looking at all the different coats and trying a few on and assessing them and deciding, which one do I like? Which coat feels really good on me and feels like authentically my coat that I just like love to wear,
Right. It's like if I handed you a coat and I said, here, try this on. I think it might look nice on you. Right. And you grab the coat. You don't have to keep the coat on if at any point you don't really like the coat anymore. Right. Like I might have handed it to you, but because you kept it on, it's not because of me. Right. It's not me, the precipitant, and that like, kept the coat on for you. It's like, you chose that, right? You kept the coat on because you wanted the coat on. And then the second you didn't want the coat on, you took it off. Right. And that's, I think I like that. I like that concept of like who's operating the thought or, who's behind the, I guess the passion or whatever you are holding near and dear to, right? It's easier to talk about these things with like examples. One of the things that one of the things that came to me when you just said that was safety around exploration, right? Like if it wasn't safe for you to try on a new coat, you just keep the coat on.
Exactly.
Right? If for some reason the coat literally had something attached to it that would hurt you to take it off, or if you took it off, someone literally like hit you on the head, you'd be like, keeping this coat on, right? So I tell people, it's like when we look at the concept of trying out, we could literally go with belief systems. It might be easier to do religion if you want to, but politics, different ideologies. We keep talking about these big ideas, but really these are very minute details in families, right? Hey, we like football. Okay. Hey, we're a music centric family. You can't like math. It's like, what? That's what I mean. It's those little nitty gritty things that actually show up for us in our everyday life. And then we have those big ideologies, which are like the politics of the world, the the religious belief systems, like whether or not you're attuning to your family or not attuning to your family. So, I mean, we have the big stuff and then we have the little stuff, but it's the safety that I think is really important for us to talk about for a second, which is like, if you're trying to develop self-trust and you're saying, I would like to explore, I would like to trust that urge to kind of venture out into a new coat, right?
Yeah.
There's a part of you that's actually speaking to you about that. Hey, I might not want to be a part of this like systematic thought. But if it's not safe to do that, you're kind
Yeah.
of out of luck.
Yeah,
You're out of luck.
absolutely. Well, and I think, and that's how people do get stuck
Mm,
wearing coats that they don't like for an extremely long time because of that sense of safety.
mm,
And that, and a lot of it does come from family systems or church community systems that establish from the get-go, and then like in all these subtle insidious ways throughout like your entire time
mm.
in that system of what they think about people who don't wear that coat.
Right. What are they telling
And
us about
yes,
the otherness?
yeah, and so if you
That's huge.
ever make an observation about somebody else's red leather coat and they go, oh, don't you know about people who wear red leather coats?
Red
Like,
leather
no,
coat.
red leather, yellow leather. Uh,
We're yellow
uh,
leather, people.
we wear blue wool, not red leather. And I wish I was joking, but I'm not, because like that actually is how it goes a lot of the times in these family and church systems, and in really like high control employer systems where there is a strong sense of identity that you are not allowed to deviate from. And I think sometimes we lose sight of just how essential social safety is for human beings, because we're not just talking about like physical safety, right? Like it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, your parents are gonna like literally physically abuse you if you listen to music they don't like, but the othering and the pushing out of you as other, and all the belittling and like a lot of the emotional like abuse that can happen in situations like this is extremely impactful. And so like if you're listening to this and you've experienced this, I'm sure you're not only nodding along right now, because it if you can't even feel safe with your own thoughts, if
Mm,
your thoughts feel like a threat to your safety,
right.
that is so it's so unpeaceful. It's
Mm,
so difficult to live in that. And so because it's so painful to feel that sensation of I can't even think like that, or I start to feel unsafe, then you're going to just repress so that you can
right.
avoid that feeling, because that feeling is scary.
I think you're definitely onto something, because if you think about, it actually reminds me of a couple episodes back when we were talking about the consent or re-traumatization, when we try to practice that stuff, is that when
Mm-hmm.
our thoughts feel like a threat, engaging with those thoughts feel like we're getting re-traumatized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is we're not wanting, our folks to be traumatized, but it's more or less like you almost have to look at what the nature of your thoughts are, right? Is there a nature of your thoughts that are like, hey, that's going to make you an other, so we don't get to think about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're like, hey, let's say sexuality, I know we keep talking about the religious stuff, but like sexuality, like, hey, I might be bi, or I might be gay, or it might be lesbian, and like you sit there and let's say, because this is happening at all different ages. This is what the beautiful thing about like some of the social media stuff is, like I'm seeing people like claim parts of their sexuality that they've literally ignored for decades. And i'm
Mm-hmm.
i'm like, what's beautiful but very painful is exploring that and realizing that's going to make me other, right? So if you're
Mm-hmm.
sitting there in your mind and you are just like chilling with your thoughts, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, maybe this feeling is actually like an attraction to an opposite gender that I've never allowed myself to explore.
Yeah.
What does that feel like? Probably terrifying, because if
Mhm.
you are anchored in a system, this is a perfect example actually, because think about like family system, right? If I'm anchored in a system with children and a spouse, whether that's a man or a wife or whoever it is on each gender, like you're sitting there, what am I supposed to do with that information, right? Or it just feels scary because you're just like, wait, do I claim my identity and then maybe just kind of chill and say I'm okay? Or do I actually go further and try to explore this and like do it in a very healthy way and like communicate that? I mean,
Mhm.
that is really, really, really painful, but you have to sit with the idea long enough. And that can feel like a threat. It can feel like a threat to your own safety of the environment that you created. Right. And
Mhm.
that's what we mean by like, not that you have to put yourself on a timeline, but it's almost like if there's any parts of you, especially when you're doing transitions in life, transitions from like teenagers to 20s and early 20s and mid 20s, like some of these things happen on like natural waves where you're feeling like a
Right.
transition and you may have those inklings like, hey, maybe I don't agree with my best friends on that ideology, or maybe I'm not really aligned with what my parents teach about this, right? And
Mhm.
then what you were saying, if you keep kind of pushing it back, what ends up happening is you start constructing a life that may not be completely aligned with what you really are deep
Mhm.
within you, right? And that's really rough when you come to terms with it. Because if you come to terms with that and realize, oh, hey, I'm finally ready to be authentic, what has to happen is a crap set, like a lot of pain and a lot of deconstruction or a lot of deconstruction. That's
Yeah. And anytime you're deconstructing major parts of your identity, you have to look at it as a grief process,
mm,
because it is. You're going to be grieving a lot. You're not just losing whatever sense of safety or community you had in that like group that you're deconstructing from, whatever that is.
right.
You are, it's a death of your own self, and you have to grieve this version of yourself as he or she or they
Yeah.
begins to
Anything.
die off and a new person inside of you begins to be born. An analogy that I use sometimes to describe this concept is a backpack. And your entire life, you've got this backpack on, and as you go through life, you accumulate various different doodads that go into your backpack,
Right.
little tools and trinkets and things like that, but you just start collecting and they become part of your backpack of life. And over time you just become very accustomed to what's in your backpack, and anytime you need something you just go to your backpack and what happens to be inside of it, and you begin to adapt to the tools that you have. So
Right.
if you need if it's time to eat and what would be most useful for this meal is a fork, but your backpack has never had a fork and you don't have one, you're just going to use what you do have. So, okay, I've got a spoon. I mean, I'll just make do with a spoon. And that just becomes your normal and you don't even think to question it at a certain point. But if you can allow that, if you can allow yourself to ask some questions and maybe start observing the types of tools that other people have in their
Right.
backpacks, then what you can do is you can have a process, and it doesn't have to be, it's always going to be grief. There's always going to be some things that are painful to let go of, but it can be cathartic and healing and a process, right? It doesn't have to all happen overnight. You don't have to completely hyper focus on it, but you can take your time, kind of like sifting through your backpack and just taking
Mm,
items out one at a time and sort of saying, is this useful to me? And do I need it? Or do I have a better tool that can also do this job? And so maybe I can let go of this one. Because if you are trying to grow and continue to accumulate new parts of yourself and make space for new parts of yourself, you're going to get to a point where like your backpack is like chock full and there's no room in there. And
Right.
so you can either stay just holding on to all the stuff you've accumulated up to a certain point because you're too scared to let go of any of it, and then there's never room for new stuff to come in. Or you can say, I don't think I need every single thing that's in this backpack anymore. I think I'd like to reorganize it and kind of downsize a little bit and maybe, get creative about, like I said, is there a multi-tool in here that could replace these 7 other things that's just taking up space? Or is there a multi-tool over there? Actually, I'd rather use that one. I think I'm going to get rid of these 7 things and just put in this one multi-tool. But you have to make space. You
Right.
got to get some of this old junk out in order to make room for the new stuff.
Absolutely. And I think what we're really speaking to is, sorry, my dog is snoring. So hopefully Troy can help us.
Wait, which dog?
Riley, my little old man. He's just snoring over here. And I'm like, you know what? We'll figure it out later. It's okay. So I think what you're speaking to though is like when we're looking at identity formation and evolution, right? What it means to evolve as a person. It's really kind of going back to what we were talking about with the self-trust versus self-doubt, is that if you are doubting anytime you remove a tool, right? You're like, okay, but I have to let go of the spoon in order to get the multi-tool, right? But you doubt yourself and you're like, nope, I can't risk it. It's too much. Like everybody I know uses a spoon. Like I can't risk being the only one holding the multi-tool because they'll look at me like I have 3 heads,
Yes.
That moment is self-ownership. Okay. I'm going to say that again. That moment is self-ownership, is that when you're holding the spoon and you're saying, I would like to be someone who has a multi-tool. I come from a family where anyone in my family is a spoon holder. And you sit there and you go, when I hold that multi-tool, I will be an other. And I will hear a lot about why I should be just using a spoon.
Yeah.
And I need to be brave enough to own that part of me. Right. And that's what we mean by like self-doubt versus self-trust. It's like you have to trust your own voice. And that doubt is possibly, right? It can be kind of internalized. This is where it's tough, right? Where it's tough where you think about it and you're like, okay, is it my doubt or is it somebody else's doubt?
Thank you. I'm going to say something right here because this is what you're going to find is if and when you do establish that sense of self-ownership and you can just confidently say, no, I'm a multi-tool user. And it doesn't bother you that other people use spoons. Like you're not trying to get other people to stop using spoons. You can just be like, that's fine. Like you can use a spoon. Doesn't bother me. Like I prefer to use a multi-tool. Well, this is what's interesting is you're going to quickly find who out there is in a space of ownership.
Yes.
And who out there is just living by their default status quo that was put into their backpack. Because the people who are living by a standard of self-ownership also just don't care that you're using a multi-tool. They would have the same exact reaction. They go, oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, I don't use multi-tools. I use a spoon. Cool. And it's no big deal because everybody is self-owning and everybody feels confident about the choice that they're making. The people who are going to push back on you are the ones who never took ownership over the choices that they're making in their life. And they are threatened that you have the audacity to step into that sovereignty and that place of self-ownership because they haven't allowed themselves to do that. And it bothers them. And you see this line is like, sometimes we call it like, oh, insecurity. And like, maybe, yeah, like there's like a layer of insecurity that comes with that, where if you have just been like making a certain choice and you're not really sure why, or you're just doing it by default, you feel better if everyone else around you is doing that same thing, because it kind
Absolutely.
of like soothes you and it eases you, because you're like, oh, okay, well, if everybody's doing this, then it must be the right thing. As soon as you see somebody else doing it differently, if you have not established like a strong sense of ownership over that choice, you're
Right.
going to feel very unstable about why you made that choice. And you're going to, them just having the audacity to live a life different than you is perceived as a threat to you. I saw this a lot in my early parenting years, because of course
Yes.
there's all kinds of petty fights that go on in the parenting sphere, especially the mommy sphere, is breastfeeding or bottle feeding and crib sleeping or co-sleeping and when to turn your kid around forward facing and like all these things, right? And the people who are like so like intense about these things, I noticed were the folks that were kind of just like doing a default. And if somebody did it differently than them, then like, oh, well, watch out.
Yeah. Or is that a reflection of, because you're doing it different, are you trying to say that I'm wrong?
That's
Right. And
exactly
that's
what it
what's
gets
so
interpreted as. It always gets
exactly
interpreted as you making a different choice is you implicitly telling me that my choice is wrong. And
right.
that's what happens when you live in a binary. It's either this or that,
Exactly.
black or white.
And when you think about our podcast, I mean, we're going to probably say this in every single episode, but we are anti all or nothing. It is the gray. It is the both and. We are the both and podcast. I'm just kidding. That's
This
not
is the both and
this is,
podcast.
we
The
should like, that's our
unofficial,
subtitle, the both
that's the
and.
unofficial subtitle.
No, but it is important to not have an all or nothing thought process when we are thinking about making decisions that create otherness. It's what kept coming up to me is my autonomy is not a threat to your own. My growth is not a threat to your own growth. My successes are not a threat to your own success. Like all of these things, we see our best friends start working out and then we're like, oh God, I never work out. And it's like, okay, but my own physical wellness and movement is not a threat to your own health and wellness, right? It's
Mhm.
just it's almost perceived as, oh, well, if they're going to do it, then I need to do it. And it's like, well, first of all, one of the things that comes with self-ownership and the balance between trusting yourself is that question. Okay, so let's say me and you, right? I start working out 5 days a week and you start being like, oh, cool. Like Jamie's really going into it. She's trying to get into shape. Cool. And you might not have asked the question, do I want to be physically active every single day? And
Mhm.
now that she's doing it, it's coming across your mind, right? It might be
Mhm.
coming across your mind, Sia, that you're like, maybe I should start, maybe I'll look into a gym, right? But the question that I want people to ask themselves is not basing their decisions off of everybody else's aspirations, right? You just need to ask yourself when something new comes into your brain, okay? Like your best friend starts working out and you ask yourself, well, I mean, maybe I should. Ask the question, if I make that decision, can I fully own that decision? Is that fully my own decision? Is that an autonomous decision? Because the thing is when you sit with questions of trying to trust yourself, you have to come to a very like um humble or rude awakening that there might be a part of you that's like, no, I don't like working out. I
Yeah.
don't like working out. So forcing myself to go to a gym 5 days a week, just like my bestie, is actually going to come from a place of deprecation. I might have to
Mm.
force myself and say, you're a piece of shit. Your best friend's doing it. So you need to do it. You're worthless. So your best friend's going today. So you need to do it.
Mm.
And I go, but that's how we make decisions that are not aligned with ourselves, that don't make it, that create this dissonance. It makes
Mhm.
a very, misaligned energy in our life, right? And that's what we talk about, like trusting your, like literally what decision you have or know, like the things you know about yourself. Okay. If you know that you do not like working out, if that thought has crossed your mind, maybe your brain is saying, hey, I kind of like moving, but I don't like, going on an elliptical for 40 minutes. Okay.
Definitely.
So now ownership would look like, well, it seems like maybe we're considering being a little more active. Like, what does activity look like in our own story? Okay. So
Mhm.
maybe it's, I want to go on a hike and just be outside. Okay.
Mhm.
That might be what yours looks like. And that's okay. Right. So now we're trying to balance between like the voice of doubt might be coming from that otherness or other people's aspirations or other people's, momentum. And you might be doubting like, oh, well, yeah, like, but if I don't work out, like, I'm just kind of a piece of crap and I'm just gonna, just be like really unhealthy and, it's all gonna be a bad, right? And it's like, okay, well, no, if you just listen to the type of experience you are looking for in regards to activity, just ask yourself, just be like, is it sitting on a Peloton bike? Is it going on an elliptical? Is it lifting weights? Or is it just something that's more aligned with who you are? If you really know that you reset in nature, maybe it is hiking,
Mhm.
right? And so it's almost like if you learn to self-trust, there is no real wrong answer. And I know that kind
Right.
of sounds scary, but it's like, no, but someone has to tell me what I am.
Hmm.
No, that's no, we don't, like that's really where all this problems come from.
Yeah. No, I totally hear what you're saying, and I think there's something to be said about like like there's different types of what we might think of doubt, like the when you hear like a sense of internal doubt, there's a couple different sources of that, right? Because if it sounds like deprecation and, putting yourself down, that isn't your voice. It's just not,
Right.
because we love ourselves,
Right.
and like our authentic selves love ourselves,
Yes.
and they would never say mean and hurtful things to ourselves. So if you hear a voice in you saying you're a piece of shit, you're lazy, you could never do that, you're not capable of that, you're not strong
Right.
enough for that, you're not committed enough for that, blah, 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 whatever. That voice was put there at some point by
Mm,
someone or multiple people over time. That wasn't you. Well, then there's another type of self-doubt, which is more kind of what we were getting to there, which is your own voice saying, are we sure we want to do that? Does that feel right to us? And
mm,
that's not self-doubt. That is actually a step of the self-ownership process, where
right.
you are finally starting to get to know yourself and trust yourself enough that when you hear something that doesn't sound aligned, when somebody suggests something to you or gives you advice or whatever that is, and you have a little voice that goes, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound right to me. That isn't self doubt. That's your voice advocating for
Mm,
yourself and letting you know what is authentic for you. And so I think it's make sure that you're being clear about that, right? Like in yourself, like when you hear anything that maybe sounds like a questioning or a doubting, it's not all bad. There is the stuff that's like hurtful and harmful, like I said at the beginning, like that's not your voice. But if there's something in there that's just kind of like has a curious tone to it and an inquiring tone, that's
mm,
probably your authentic voice trying to understand a little bit deeper what this thing is that we're about to put into our backpack before
yeah,
we
I
before we
love
put it
that.
in.
Yeah, I love that. I think if we're really trying to reconceptualize, self-doubt and self-trust, right? If we're looking at the critical mind versus the curious mind, right? The curious mind is going to be developing self-trust. So you are going to have that variance of, you know, questioning, which is
Mhm.
healthy. And then it's almost like, well, when we use the word self-doubt, maybe it's just a misnomer because,
Mm.
maybe it's more or less.
I kind of like that, critical or curious.
Right. Maybe it's just a
Yeah.
collection of specific voices that have kind of accumulated that we've called our own, I mean, I'm thinking about right now how many times I've had self-doubt or doubt within myself, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I've claimed it as my own voice. When in reality, if I look back, I'm like, you know, I absolutely knew that I was like capable, but when I would have doubtful like that self-doubt, right? The quote unquote for my people who are listening. Um the quote unquote self-doubt was just taken in as my own, and it was paralleling a point of advocacy that was like, no, you can absolutely do that. You can absolutely do that. You are totally capable of that. And it's countering that other voice that also felt like mine at one point. I guess this is like maybe a testament to that own, learning discernment, like your own discernment of where you are and where others are, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
you begin and others end, their voices versus your voices. And it is a moment of allowing that empowered voice or the advocacy voice to really be the one that echoes in our mind, right? Because we are going to have those, and like, this is where I try to be practical, and we're really about practicality. We don't want to be forcing people to be doing stuff that just makes nobody's forced, obviously, but we don't want people to feel as though they have to shoot the moon and get everything done right away. But if you're
Right.
thinking about, like, I don't know, I mean, yeah, like you really have to sit there and you have to almost sift.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sift through the thoughts, and
Mm-hmm.
that takes a lot of work. And I don't know. I kind of want to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on this.
I think this is where I always come into. Now I'm going to move into the same thing. Another thing I like to harp on, which is that radical self-acceptance and
Right.
being patient with yourself as you process through anything that you are processing through, and giving that radical acceptance and compassion to yourself as you walk through this process, whatever it is, because there are going to be blunders and missteps, and none of that is negative. It's all just information. And that's what we were talking about last time with the self-betrayal, and
Right.
to not sit there and deprecate yourself if you make a quote unquote mistake. Like, was it a mistake or was it just a learning process? Did you just learn something else about yourself and now you have more information moving forward about
Right.
who you are? And I think that's what I really want to encourage is patience with yourself and being absolutely just so loving to yourself as you work through this. Because I mean, in the areas of my life that I have been brave enough to open up that backpack and start sifting through and deciding what of this truly belongs to me and what I want to let go of, there were a lot of times throughout those processes where I picked up a tool and went, I really don't want this anymore, but I am too scared to let go of it, so I'm putting it back in.
Right.
I did it a lot for a long time. But if it's an ongoing process, then eventually there's going to be a day where you take that out and you go, I haven't wanted this in my backpack for a really long time, and I'm actually ready to let go of it now. And
Mm,
and you feel, and you'll feel it will feel, the moment will be correct, and you will know
mm,
that it's okay that you held on to it for as long as you did, and you'll know why. And you can just look at yourself and love yourself and say, I know why we kept it in there for as long as we did, and it's okay that we did,
right.
and it's okay to let it go, you
Right.
know.
I love that. I love it. It really speaks to how this work is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly painful. It really does cause a lot of shakeup in our interpersonal relationships. It causes a lot of shakeup in our own relationship with ourselves because, we're trying to reconstruct who we are. And at the same time, there is this moment of, how would we describe it? There is this moment of like stability when you can just stand on your own 2 feet and say, this is fully my life. Like, this is fully my decision.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that things are perfect. That's why I try to explain to people about self-growth, is that you are still going to have those traffic jams, and you're still going to have the frustrating conversations with friends and blow ups at family members. You're still going to have those things. And you are also coexisting with that chaos will be a stabilized mind on the other side when someone comes at you and says, absolutely not, you're totally wrong, you're raising your kids wrong, you're doing this, everything you're doing is so chaotic, and I totally disagree with you, right? You can have that blowout fight. And I explain to people, you are not an emotionless being at that moment. You will have your feelings hurt, right? If at any point one of my family members said, you're a piece of crap mom and that you're doing a bad job, it will hurt my feelings. And I have developed a very particular set of skills. No, I've developed a very particular set of skills that has given me the anchor to actually sit with that dissonance for a second. And if they look at me and say, why are you giving your child sugar after 7? I can sit there and I can be like, I fully own that decision. I want them to have a treat. I absolutely do not care if you think that that's wrong. I get that, like, you have a specific thing about your family and when they get sugar and when they don't get sugar. That's totally fine. I literally want you to feel like that's I want you to feel like that is an ownership thing for you, right? And because you're attacking me and saying, oh my God, what kind of mom would like let their kids go, wild and have all the sugar in their body right before bedtime? I would literally have to stand back. I would have to take that blow, and I would have to understand, of course I can advocate for myself, but when I'm driving home from that, conflict, I can sit with that feeling and I can say, is that your Jamie, do you fully own that? Like, do you fully not care whether or not that's perceived as wrong or not? And that moment is the moment of stability. And you are speaking to your authentic self. You are saying, no, I feel confident in that decision. I get that people disagree with me. I feel confident that that is just how I want to run run the show at bedtime every once in a while. And I am totally comfortable with that. That is what we're speaking to. It's that moment of when conflicts come up or when dissonance comes up, right? You are not given them, but you are creating them. You are bolstering them. You are establishing these skills over the course of time that gives you the capacity to ride the wave. That's what we're doing. It's giving you the capacity to ride the wave.
And that is self-trust.
Yes. I love it.
Boom. Defined.
Well, that is what we have today, but we will be seeing you soon. Make sure you are subscribing, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you so much, y'all, for tuning in. If anything we said resonated, please subscribe and leave a review anywhere you listen to podcasts. This absolutely helps us grow, and we really do value your voice on this podcast. So if you have anything you'd like to contribute, any tips, any topics, or if you just want to say hi, you can email us at unlearned@recollectedself.com. You can find us on Instagram at the Unlearned Podcast, or individual Instagrams at Recollected Self, and CA's is at Embracing Divergence. You can also find us over on TikTok under those handles. If you want to join our Patreon for $5 a month, you can be our Coffee Fiend Club member. And that's going to give you access to our podcast within a podcast, which is called Unhinged. This is basically where we let loose, completely unedited. We are literally just shooting the breeze, having fun. You can see our full personalities, and it is a blast, honestly. It's pretty fun. So if you want to join us, you can find that at patreon.com/unlearned. And that's it. The last thing I want to tell you is I want you to be brave enough to fight for the person you want to become. And this is how we do the work.